Hello, welcome to the first in a new NCFE 20-minute theorist T-level series. This series aims to break down each of the theoretical and pedagogical approaches covered in the education and early years T-level into bite-sized videos in tutor and student-friendly formats. Today's 20-minute session will hopefully support your understanding of the what you need to teach aspect of the qualification specification. And this will support in teaching and learning and formative assessment activities of element 2, supporting education. In this video, over the next 20 minutes, we will focus on knowledge point 2.3, behaviourism theory. So let's have a look at what we will cover in today's session on behaviourism. We'll begin by defining the key principles, explaining pedagogical approaches, and exploring evidence which supports behaviourism theory. Throughout the video, we will shine a spotlight on the important terms and Tier 3 vocabulary. And at the end of the video, there will be links made to teaching and learning activities to support the delivery of knowledge point 2.3 with relation to behaviourism theory. So let's begin. Let's start by exploring the key principles of behaviourist theory. Behaviourism theory states that behaviour is shaped by external stimuli and interaction with the environment, rather than internal cognitive processes. We can use our ABCs to help explain and remember this. A, antecedent. Antecedent stimulus is the events, actions, or circumstances that occur before a behaviour. Questioning what led to this. B, behaviour is then triggered. What did the child do? And C is the consequences. Consequences are the events or stimuli that happen to the person immediately following the behaviour. Positive and negative reinforcement can modify behaviour and learning. In operant conditioning, positive and negative do not mean good and bad. Instead, positive means that you are adding something and negative means you are taking something away. Reinforcement means you are increasing a behaviour and punishment means that you are decreasing a behaviour. Development of behaviours is seen as a continuous process that is gradual and cumulative. Much like every habit you have ever had, good or bad, it follows the same 3-step pattern. And the 3 R's can help us to remember. R1, reminder, the trigger that initiates the behaviour. R2, routine, the behaviour itself, the action you take. And R3, reward, the benefit you gain from doing the behaviour. In schools and childcare settings, when they are reviewing behaviour, they will often complete ABC charts to identify triggers to behaviour so that practitioners can support young people to change habitual behaviour through positive and negative reinforcement. Pause the video at this point to extend your discussion with your peers, and you may make use of the questions on the screen as a starting point or generate your own questions and ideas based on what has just been discussed. So, what pedagogical approaches support behaviourism theory? Let's begin with questioning. Behaviourism focuses on the idea that all behaviours are learned through interaction with our environment, and questioning is an important tool to support children to interact with their environment. Effective questioning is a skill that needs to be developed, but which has the power to transform teaching and learning. Questioning can be broken down into 3 stages. The question itself is a stimulus, the answer is a response, and feedback to the answers can have a positive or negative consequence. Now let's apply the ABC to questioning. Antecedent, the teacher asks the question. What is 2 add 3? Behaviour, the student or child responds. 6. Consequence, the teacher offers feedback or rewards. Is the child praised for attempting the question or criticised for getting the answer wrong? Reinforcing the importance of having a go means the child is likely to attempt questions next time they are asked. Punishment for not knowing the right answer means next time they may not be willing to answer questions. This could be applied to a range of scenarios, asking children to share toys, asking them to line up quietly, tidying the play area. The list goes on. Reflect on a moment from placement when you have asked a child or pupil a question. Did the student respond or behave in the manner you expected? Was there a consequence to their behaviour? What would you do differently? Pause the video at this point to extend your discussion with your peers. Another pedagogical approach is direct instruction. Direct instruction builds on behaviourist theory and breaks each learning task down into its smallest components, focusing on mastering simpler skills before proceeding to more difficult tasks. Direct instruction is widely recognised for its clarity and simplicity for putting them into practice in everyday classrooms. For example, phonics, vocabulary and comprehension tasks, but equally in modelling process steps to calculations in maths. While some principles of direct instruction can be implemented quite quickly and without forward planning, others do require advanced planning for them to be effective. For example, knowing the curriculum and the ability of your pupils is important to see how the material can be broken into small steps when sharing new material. And this requires teachers to take some time in analysing what needs to be taught, prior knowledge, and the limitation of working memory. Using a model like I do, we do, you do provides scaffolding that can help students increase speed of processing and move strategies from short-term memory to long-term memory. Step 1 would be to use a think aloud to introduce a strategy of finding the main idea. You will briefly model what you want the students to do. That's in the I do stage. Then students apply the strategy in pairs or groups. We do. And you can adjust your instruction based on your observations at that point. And then the you do stage, students practice the strategy independently. Again, pause the video at this point to extend your discussion with your peers. We'll move on now and we'll look at mastery learning as an approach. Mastery learning approaches aim to ensure that all pupils have mastered key concepts before moving on to the next topic, and it is supported by direct instruction. Subject matter is broken into blocks or units with predetermined objectives and specified outcomes, and learners must demonstrate mastery on unit tests, and typically you'd be looking for 80% of mastery of correct answers before moving on to new material. Key instant recall facts is an approach which supports a solid grasp of learning key facts. Examples including number bonds or times tables in maths, or key dates and names in history, places in geography, countries and capital cities, or in phonics, phoneme and grapheme correspondence. Pause the video at this point and extend your discussion with your peers around key instant recall facts. There are some tasks on the screen. You may choose to explore those, or you may choose to take the discussion in your own direction. Let's move on. So far, we've explored approaches, but now let's discuss the evidence which supports these approaches in practice. Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchical model that categorizes learning objectives into varying levels of complexity. These levels vary from basic knowledge and comprehension to advanced evaluation and creation. Bloom's taxonomy provides a framework for structuring these questions from lower order thinking to higher order and metacognitive thinking. This is similar to the core exam assessments for T-level students. Thinking of the command verbs, state, define, list, label, name are lower order and part of AO1. Question stems such as compare, contrast, categorize, clarify can be considered mid-range and require breaking information into parts, making connections between those parts, and are generally AO2 questions. Whereas produce, develop, invent, design, hypothesize all require higher order thinking and metacognitive strategies in creating or generating new ideas by combining information, and are AO3 questions. Pavlov and his dogs you may have heard of, and Pavlov had the idea that dogs do not need to learn certain things, such as salivating when they see food. He said that these reflexes are hardwired into dogs. But let's begin by discussing the key terminology to understand Pavlov's evidence with some of that tier 3 vocabulary. Pavlov's dog experiment played a critical role in the discovery of one of the most important concepts in psychology, classical conditioning. He coined the dog's food as an unconditioned stimulus, and the salivation as an unconditioned response, that being that the response did not require any learning on the dog's part. Pavlov then used a metronome as his neutral stimulus. By itself, the metronome did not elicit any response from the dogs. And then this started, or Pavlov began, the conditioning procedure, whereby clicking the metronome and introducing it just before he gave the food to his dogs. The dogs had learned an association between the metronome and the food, and a new behaviour had been learned. By pairing the sound of the metronome with the presentation of food, Pavlov was able to condition the dogs to salivate at the sound of the metronome, This was because their dogs had learned to associate the sound of the metronome with the presentation of food and would salivate in anticipation of being fed. Continuing with evidence, the Little Albert experiment demonstrated that classical conditioning could be used to create a phobia. A phobia is an irrational fear that is out of proportion to danger. In this experiment, a previously unafraid baby was conditioned to become afraid of a rat. Little Albert was a 9-month-old infant who was tested on his reactions to various neutral stimuli. When he was shown a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, and various masks, Albert was described as, on the whole, stolid and unemotional. He showed no fear of any of these stimuli. When Albert was just over 11 months, the white rat was represented, and seconds later, a hammer was struck against a steel bar. The Little Albert experiment demonstrated that classical conditioning could be used to create a phobia out of proportion to danger. And in this experiment, a previously unafraid baby was conditioned to become afraid of a rat. This experiment also demonstrated 2 additional concepts which were originally outlined by Pavlov. Extinction. And this means that although a condition associated can be incredibly strong initially, it begins to fade if it is not reinforced until it disappears completely. And generalization. Generalization means that a condition associated or conditioned associations can often widen beyond the specific stimuli presented. So, for instance, if a child develops a negative association with one teacher, this association might also be made with others, which is important for us to consider as practitioners. Moving on to Skinner's box, I want to begin by defining the key terms in Skinner's box. So we've got neutral operants, which is responses from the environment that don't have an impact on the likelihood of behaviour being repeated. We've got reinforcers, which are responses from the environment that increase the likelihood of a behaviour being repeated. These can be either positive or negative. For example, you're more likely to repeat a behaviour in college if your tutor praises you for it, or if you receive kudos and compliments from your peers. Punishers, responses from the environment that decrease the likelihood of a behaviour being repeated. So that punishment weakens behaviour. For example, if your behaviour leads to sanctions in college or prevents you from doing well, you may be less likely to display that behaviour again. In his experiment, Skinner showed how negative reinforcement worked by placing a rat in his Skinner box and then subjecting it to an unpleasant electric current which caused it some discomfort. As the rat moved around the box, it would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately when it did so, the electric current would be switched off. The rats quickly learned to go straight to the lever after a few minutes of being put in the box, and the consequence of escaping the electric current ensured that they would repeat the action again and again. So we looked at mastery before as an approach, and the evidence underpinning that is the Mathematics Mastery by ARC curriculum, and it's a whole school approach to teaching mathematics. It aims to raise attainment for all pupils and close the attainment gap between pupils from low-income families and their peers. The ARC curriculum uses the pedagogical approaches already discussed of direct instruction, breaking new learning down into manageable chunks, scaffolding and effective teacher questioning to ensure pupils understand, compared to traditional curricula. Fewer topics are covered in more depth, and greater emphasis is placed on problem solving and on encouraging mathematical thinking. The research Evidence shows that this approach improved the attainment of pupils compared to their peers who did not follow this curriculum approach. In the primary study, pupils made 2 months more progress following this approach, and in secondary schools, pupils made 1 month more progress following this approach. Confident understanding of the vocabulary will put you in a strong position for core exams and professional discussions. Throughout the session, I've highlighted that Tier 3 vocabulary, and you can see it on the screen now. Using theory to support your practical activities and planning, teaching and assessment demonstrates a deep level of understanding of child development and learning principles if you are using that correct terminology. So there are some ideas there for you that you may take away from today's session. Reflecting, designing, making, any of those ideas that you might want to pause the video and take ideas from this into placement or design them in college. And we also have tutor packs which have been created with group and individual tasks to support teaching and learning of this element. Let's reflect on what we've discussed in this 20-minute series. Hopefully you can now understand the key principles of behaviourism theory, and we'll be able to explain the approaches which are applied in practice and how they're underpinned by pedagogy. Through the exploration of evidence, we've learned how the theory is underpinned by observations of behaviour, reactions, consequences, and a variety of experiments. Vocabulary is important to support clear explanations and reasoning when using theory in professional discussions, and teaching and learning activities were interwoven throughout the session with stop and think activities and takeaway tasks. Finally, you can provide feedback and evaluation on today's session using the QR code on the screen, and that helps me know what you've enjoyed and what I can improve next time. I hope the objectives of the session were achieved and that attending the session was valuable and will have a positive impact on your delivery. Thank you.